everyone, my name is Elise. Welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. We are doing a very exciting video because we're doing my best books of the year so far. These videos are always really fun to film. In some ways, I think the mid-year one is like even more interesting because you're also trying to figure out which ones are going to be on your best books of the year list at the end of the year and which ones might drop off. So intriguing, but I have 8 books that we're going to be talking about today. I thought about doing a top 10, but there really was like 8 that felt like standouts. And then if I were to add 2 more in, it opened it up into a world of so many other books that I read this year. And 8 just felt easier. These are like the true standouts to me at this point. And interestingly, that ended up being 4 fiction and 4 nonfiction. One of the nonfiction is like nonfiction asterisk mark maybe, but that's the way it went out. But I'm still gonna rank them in order. And that is, pretty arbitrary, but I know definitely this year my top 3 were really easy. And I think those would be my best guess to stay on for the whole year. But I've loved the other 5 as well. Like sometimes you just have that really like special book that might be like favorite of all time instead of just a favorite book of the year. So without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and get into this list. So coming in at number 8, we have In Vitro by Isabella Zapata. This is translated from the Spanish by Robin Myers, and the subtitle for this is On Longing and Transformation, and it's published by Coffee House Press. This is a short book about the author's experience going through in vitro fertilization, and it is written in vignettes in 3 sections. I don't want to tell you the sections because that might be considered a spoiler, but it follows her journey through this process. And I thought it was such a unique way to talk about this story in almost like a fever dream type of way, which is how she was feeling at the time and is how she's telling us she's feeling. So it really is an immersive experience. And we as the reader get to have a small taste of what that confusion and chaos and sadness and despair and hope and all the things that were swirling around in her brain, we feel inundated with it. And I thought it was just such smart storytelling, and also like how hard it would have been to write all of this out, to make sense of it yourself, but then to also, present it to others. So really loved this book and would definitely recommend it if that's a topic that you want to learn more about, if you want to become, more empathetic to people going through that experience, whatever it might be. So that is my number 8. And then coming in at number 7, we have Motherfield, and this is by Julia Cimafiejeva, and it's translated from the Belarusian by Valzyna Mort and Hanif Abduraqib. And this one is part poetry, part protest diary is how she names it. And this is the one where I was like, it is nonfiction, but it's also kind of not. So the diary section is nonfiction, and the poetry section is informed on real life and facts, but those are more, they're like feelings, right? It's like an art piece based on a feeling, not necessarily trying to be a factual account of what happened. So it's kind of like a nonfiction plus maybe, and I adored this. This is published by Deep Vellum, I should say, and it was so unexpected for me how much I emotionally was able to connect with this piece. I thought having the diary sections first and then going into the poetry was such a smart format decision. I think it really sets up an excellent framework to go into the poetry with, which is more experimental. It was just a punch to the gut. I mean, the way that she was able to communicate those feelings to us really hit. And it's hard to do that with someone who's having me on the other side of the world, having a totally different experience. For her to be able to emotionally grip me the way that she did, I think was just a testament to how great of a writer she is. And I definitely want to look into more of her poetry as well. So I also think this could be a great introduction to people for poetry, because you are getting some more context for the poems up front. I think that could make you feel more invested and grounded in the poetry itself. So would definitely recommend to anyone who is either interested in poetry or likes poetry already and wants to read an amazing collection. So that is Motherfield. Then coming in at number 6 is one that I just recently read and spoke about, and that is Consent, a memoir by Vanessa Springora. This is translated from the French by Natasha, and it's published by Harper Via. This is the author's account of being groomed by a French author at the time. Many people knew that he was grooming young girls and were either complicit or outright supportive of him doing that. And the author is now, as an adult, looking back on this time, trying to make sense of it for herself, trying to inform the reader about how these circumstances happen and how we can try and stop them. And I think she does a really good job communicating all of that. Another instance where it's crafted really well just on a sentence structure. I think she's a very talented writer, but she also does a really good job of unpacking an extremely fraught experience and presenting it in a package to the reader that feels accessible but also challenging. So loved it for that reason and thought she did a fantastic job with it. So that is Consent by Vanessa Springora. And now we're going to go over to fiction. I know it seemed like I had all the nonfiction in a row, but now we're going to go to a fiction book. There's still one nonfiction left. So this one is Butter Honey Pig Bread, coming in at number 5. This is by Francesca Ekwuyasi and is published by Arsenal Pulp Press. And this is a novel about sisters. I have read so many books about sisters this year, and there are going to be more to come on this list as well. But I thought this was one of the best books that uses a non-linear timeline. So we are flitting back and forth, not in chronological order, very frequently throughout the novel, and I think this book does it better than maybe any other book I've read that does that. She makes you feel so rooted in whatever scene you're in that you, one, just feel like in very capable hands by the author, but your mind doesn't have space to ask questions. She's giving you enough detail or backstory or anchoring, whatever it might be, to make you feel like, okay, like I'm along for this ride. The characters were distinct enough to know which character you were with at any given time. And I think also strong enough and developed enough to be able to sit with them at different points of their lives and feel like you knew them a little bit and you could recognize them in whatever point you were looking at. So I thought that is just impressive on so many levels. I think it must be so hard to do, and I absolutely loved it. It talks about generational trauma. It talks about rifts between families and the pain and work that it takes to come back together. And it talks about girlhood and womanhood. And it follows a mother and 2 sisters, and how in some ways they're having very similar experiences in girlhood and womanhood. And a lot of them bad, being a part of systems that do not support them and in fact harm them. But also the extreme joy that they can have in coming into their own version of womanhood and being happy with creating a version that feels right to them. So many lovely things about this book, but I really enjoyed it, and that is my number 5, Butter Honey Pig Bread. And then at number 4, we have the last nonfiction on this list, and that is Bodywork by Mellisa Febos. This one is published by Catapult, and the subtitle of this one is The Radical Power of Personal Narrative. And that's exactly what this is talking about. Mellisa Febos has written many memoirs and essay collections, and it's not only what her experience has been like having written those, and also the aftermath of having written those, because some of them were years and years back. but it's also about craft, what it's like to write nonfiction, maybe some of the ethical implications of nonfiction, not just for yourself, but some of the collateral damage that it can have for the people around you and how you might navigate that. Again, it's just a theme of like these brilliant female authors that are like just truly gifted writers, and that comes across on the page, but also the ideas that she's presenting just seem so smart. They just seem so smart, and I ate up every word of it. This is definitely a book that I would reread, and if you like books on craft, this is an amazing one for you. If you also like niche nonfiction that does a deep dive into a specific area, this is another great one for you. And I want to read everything else Mellisa Febos has written and would highly recommend anyone to pick this one up. So that is Bodywork. All right, so now we're getting into the top 3, and my top 3 are like, oof, they're really, really good. I've absolutely loved them this year. And as people in my personal life have asked me what my favorite books have been, these are the 3 that I always bring up. So at number 3, we have Case Study by Graeme McRae Burnett. This is published by Biblioasis, and oh, I loved this book. It is such a fascinating, twisty take on personality and psychology. It is about a woman whose sister has previously committed suicide, and her sister becomes convinced that the psychoanalyst that she was seeing at the time manipulated her into committing suicide. So she goes kind of like undercover, not anything too extreme, but just kind of like assumes a false name and starts seeing him as a patient. So you're getting their sessions together, and then also her kind of prior and post session. The characters in this are very unique. I think it's really hard to have original characters in this day and age, and that's not a fault on any author. It's just hard. Like, you know, things being truly original are rare, and these characters I felt like were so original. I really did not know where this book was going to go, and it's confronting you with hard things about the human condition and the subjectivity of truth, and it's very psychologically hazy. You're not really sure who's reliable, who's not. And yeah, I just loved every second of reading it. I felt like I walked away being very impressed with the character work and with a lot to think about. So absolutely loved it. Would definitely recommend if you haven't picked this one up yet. And then we have at number 2, and number 2 and number 1 were very hard for me to decide what order. But number 2 is The Center by Ayesha Manazir Siddiqi. I own the edition by Picador, which is actually the UK edition, because I love that one better. And that's the image you're seeing here. I have actually hauled that book, but I haven't done the book haul for it yet. So you'll see it at some point soon. But this book is about a language center that purports to be able to have you become fluent in a language in 10 days. And not just any type of fluent as if you were a native speaker of that language, which is pretty much impossible. So our narrator is dating a man at the time who she's somewhat unimpressed with, but is maybe dating him out of convenience and possibly even selfishness. He learns Urdu, which is her native language, and she is a translator. She translates a lot of films. She feels like that's not the top tier academic echelon of translation and wants to translate great works of literature instead. So they're going to visit her family, and he all of a sudden knows Urdu and knows it better than she does. She's clearly very suspicious and wrenches it out of him that he goes to this language center. You can only ever tell one person in your life about the language center. It's very exclusive, invitation only, very private, and she decides to go to learn German. So on the one hand, you have this kind of mystery about why this language center works. Why are people able to learn a language this well, this quickly? And then you also have these themes on colonization of language, and how that plays a huge role in oppression. You have a really messy main character who doesn't see herself objectively, as none of us do, but is really struggling to see herself for who she is and trying to come into her own. I thought this book was just so brilliant. The main character is so singularly written, and that's going to come up again in my top book of the year, and would definitely recommend this. I could not put this book down. I was in a reading slump at the time, and this book said, reading slump, who dis? Because I wanted to read it constantly. So I would definitely recommend The Center. I think it's very smart and propulsive. And then we have my favorite book of the year so far, and that is Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad. This one is published by Grove Press in the US, and so many people have talked about this book, but oh my God, it is so good. And I talked about this recently in whatever wrap up this was in, a month ago or 2 months ago. And there's so much to say about this book that, like, you know, I said some things there. I can say all new things here. Our main character is a theatrical actress, and she is going back to visit her sister in Haifa. And while she's there, one of her sister's friends is putting on a production of Hamlet, and she needs our main character, Sonia, to fill in for a couple of days because one of their actors is not able to participate and they need to replace her. We have two main things happening. One, the play itself, and you're getting dialogue from the play. And then you also have Sonia being back in Haifa and being in the West Bank for the first time in a very, very long time. And this is also a character that I feel like is so singularly written. She was so fascinating. I just wanted to know everything about her, and that's what kept me turning the pages. It wasn't like the plot was out of control or anything, but she was just so fascinating as a character. And that's the comparison that I see to The Center for me. And it's really interesting because I think Jen Campbell compared these two books recently as well, and hers is for a different reason. It's more in terms of translation, which that does come up in both books. But I think the two main characters have so many similarities for me that as soon as I was reading Enter Ghost, I was like, whoa, this is really taking me back to reading The Center. So it's interesting that we both made the connection between the two books, but for different reasons. But this book, what to talk about. I think if we look at the title integration alone, which gets into some of the themes, like why name it Enter Ghost? Obviously, Enter Ghost is a stage direction in the play for Hamlet. The main ghost in Hamlet is his father. If you think about who the ghosts are in this book, there are a couple that we could look at. You could say like, okay, it's her father. Make that direct comparison. He's definitely in the book sparingly, and I think you could make that argument, but I think the real ghosts in this book are twofold. I think it's Sonia's mother and her ex-lover. These are two people that are frequently talked about in terms of the impact that they have on Sonia, but get no time on the page. And I think they are the ghosts of this book that continue to haunt her, to affect her life, to affect her relationship with her sister, affect her relationship with herself and her career. They have so much pull on her life, even though they are not on the page at all. And I think it's fascinating for us to think about it through that lens and like why she would name it Enter Ghost. And I loved all the exploration with that and thinking about how that plays into Hamlet and some of the connections and mirroring that's happening there. I had also recently seen a stage adaptation of Hamlet right before I read this book. So it was very freshly in my mind. And I think that did help my experience of it. I love the sister relationship in here. It's just so fantastic. If you have not read this book yet, I would really, really encourage you to read it. There's so much to say, and you know, we can talk about it more in the comments below if you also love this book. But I will end it there. So these are the 8 books that I have absolutely adored so far this year. We'll see how many stay on my list for the end of the year, but please do let me know what your favorite books of the year have been so far. I just might read them, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.